"Hey, Blackie, go serve." The words ripped through the ballroom like shattered glass. Laughter followed, sharp and echoing against the chandeliers that hung above the glittering crowd. Dozens of tuxedos and satin gowns turned their heads, some grinning, others pretending not to hear. But she heard it, and she didn't flinch. At the center of the storm stood a woman in a pale rose dress, phone pressed calmly against her ear. She didn't look like the type they expected at this table. No diamonds dripping from her wrists, no entourage clearing her path. Just poise, just silence, just eyes that saw further than anyone in the room. The billionaire family near the champagne fountain leaned in, savoring their cruelty like it was part of the evening's entertainment. One of them, a matriarch in midnight blue silk, pointed straight at her, laughing so hard tears pricked the corners of her eyes. Her husband doubled over, clutching his glass. Their son smirked, raising his voice so the circle of guests around them could hear. "Careful, or she might think she belongs at this table." The crowd tensed. Some chuckled nervously. Some shifted uncomfortably, their champagne suddenly sour on their tongues. And yet, through it all, the woman in the rose dress stayed still, calm, anchored. She adjusted the phone against her ear and whispered just loud enough, "Stand by." That was all. 2 words. But the tone in her voice was steel. It was the kind of steel that bends empires when it decides to move. A young associate at the edge of the room stopped pretending to check his watch. His eyes darted between the family and the woman, and without thinking, he lifted his phone just low enough to record. Something in the air told him this moment would matter. The matriarch stepped closer, heels clacking against marble, her smile dripping with venom. "You're dressed nicely for a server," she sneered. "Why don't you make yourself useful?" More laughter erupted, the kind that stings, the kind that tells you the room doesn't see you as human. But the woman didn't rise to the bait. She let the noise roll over her like smoke. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was a countdown. "And before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here." Now, back to her. Because in less than 10 minutes, the same people mocking her would be begging for her attention. In less than 10 minutes, the $900 million deal they thought they owned would vanish like mist. But for now, all anyone could see was a black woman in a rose dress, standing alone in a sea of arrogance. Calm, silent, waiting. The ballroom glowed like a palace. Marble columns soared toward ceilings painted in gold trim, chandeliers dripping crystal light across gowns worth fortunes. Waiters in black vests weaved through the crowd with silver trays, balancing champagne flutes that never seemed to empty. The kind of evening where wealth wasn't just displayed, it was weaponized. And in the middle of it, she arrived quietly. No spotlight, no grand announcement, just a woman in a rose-colored dress, simple heels, hair pulled back with understated grace. She carried no glittering clutch, no string of pearls. What she carried instead was composure, the kind money can't purchase and arrogance can't shake. Most guests didn't even notice her slip into the room. Those who did assumed she belonged to the staff, maybe an assistant, maybe a guest's date trying too hard to blend in. That was the point. She didn't want to be seen until it mattered. Near the orchestra pit, the billionaire family held court, glasses raised, their laughter ran louder than the violins. Guests orbited them like planets drawn to gravity, financial giants, politicians, socialites who lived for proximity to power. The family name carried weight on every trading floor from New York to Dubai. And tonight, they expected to finalize a deal that would add another empire to their legacy. $900 million on paper, more in influence. She moved closer to the periphery, scanning the room with eyes that cataloged every detail, the hush of conversations, the sparkle of impatience in men waiting to shake hands, the smug tilt of heads that believed the world bent only for them. At a corner table, a junior associate recognized her. He'd seen her face once. In a Forbes feature his mentor showed him, the silent architect behind billion-dollar mergers. His breath caught, but he stayed quiet, realizing at once she was here incognito, and the family mocking her had no idea. She paused near a tray of untouched champagne, fingers brushing the stem of a glass but not lifting it. Instead, her phone buzzed. She tilted it to her ear, voice low, measured. "Timing matters," she whispered. Whoever was on the other end answered with crisp precision. She nodded once and set the phone back down by her side. Across the room, the matriarch in midnight blue glanced over again, smirk curling into ridicule. To her, this was sport, mocking someone she thought was beneath her, reinforcing a hierarchy written in prejudice. But the woman in rose didn't break. She never had. Because she remembered another room, another night years earlier. A conference in Atlanta where she'd been mistaken for event staff, ordered to fetch water for men who didn't know her name but traded stocks under her company's umbrella. She hadn't corrected them then. She had simply watched, waited, and weeks later, acquired the very firm they bragged about. Tonight felt the same, only bigger. The music swelled, the family toasted, and the deal they thought they owned balanced on a knife's edge, resting silently in the hands of the woman they dismissed as nobody. The toast ended, glasses clinked, and the laughter rolled on. But the matriarch's eyes hadn't left her. With each passing second, the smirk grew sharper, until finally she called across the room, voice slicing through the music. "Whose guest is she? Or did someone leave the service door unlocked?" Heads turned. Guests craned their necks. The orchestra faltered for half a beat, then stumbled back into rhythm. Attention had shifted, and the family relished it. The patriarch leaned against the bar, swirling his cognac lazily. "Look at that dress," he muttered loud enough for half the room to hear. 900 million on the line, and people like her think they're in the conversation? Please. Their son stepped forward, smirk wide, voice dripping entitlement. "Maybe she's here to clear the glasses. Should we tip her now or later?" The surrounding circle erupted into cruel chuckles, each one a spark that fed the fire. Still, she didn't move. She didn't defend. She didn't even blink. Her phone remained at her side, one hand resting lightly on the stem of an untouched champagne glass. Silence became her shield, and that silence unsettled them more than any protest could. A woman nearby, a young attorney clutching her clutch a little too tightly, shifted uneasily. She knew this wasn't right, but her voice caught in her throat. Across the ballroom, the junior associate's phone angled slightly higher, red light glowing faint. He wasn't sure if he'd ever used the footage, but instinct told him to keep it rolling. The matriarch wasn't finished. She glided across the floor, heels tapping like a gavel. Stopping just short of her, she tilted her head, lips curled. "Do you even know what this event is? Deals are being made here, real deals. This isn't a place for spectators." The word hung heavy, wrapped in condescension. Spectator, outsider, intruder. The woman in rose lifted her gaze slowly, eyes meeting the matriarch's with a calm so absolute it felt like defiance. But she said nothing. The silence stretched, pulling tension tight across the room. That was when the patriarch added fuel, raising his glass toward the crowd. $900 million, he announced like a showman. "And tonight, it belongs to us, not to anyone who just wandered in." The room broke into applause, shallow and performative, but beneath the clapping, murmurs stirred. Not everyone agreed with what they were watching. Not everyone thought cruelty was entertainment. The woman in rose inhaled, steady and measured. This wasn't new. This wasn't shocking. It was familiar. The same tone she'd heard at 25, being mistaken for an assistant at a board meeting she chaired. The same laughter she'd endured at 32, when a rival executive dismissed her as decor before signing the contract she wrote. Now, here it was again, louder, bolder, more public. And still she waited, because she knew what no one else did. The family's empire teetered on her next word. And when she chose to speak, silence would never return to this room the same way again. The applause faded, but the sneers remained. Eyes circled her like vultures, tracing a figure already fallen. The matriarch tilted her chin higher, confident the room was hers. The patriarch smirked behind his glass, satisfied with the performance. Their son chuckled under his breath, shaking his head as if amused by the idea of her existence here. And still she said nothing. Her hand lowered the champagne glass she hadn't touched. She didn't drink, didn't toast, didn't step away. She simply stood, posture steady, presence unyielding. The kind of stillness that wasn't passive but deliberate, like a soldier choosing not to fire until the enemy is close enough to see the whites of their eyes. Silence, heavy, electric. It wasn't submission. It was a refusal. The matriarch's voice broke it, sharper now. "Did you not hear me? Or do you not speak English?" She let the venom drip, certain it would force a reaction. But the woman in rose only shifted her gaze, sweeping across the circle of faces around her. Some laughed nervously, some smirked, but others lowered their eyes, uneasy with what they saw. At the edge of the room, the young attorney clutched her clutch tighter. She wanted to speak, but fear pinned her tongue. The junior associate recording whispered under his breath, "Say something," though deep down he knew the silence itself was the statement. The patriarch grew impatient. He leaned forward, voice booming. "This is a billion-dollar room. You don't belong. You're standing here wasting everyone's time." His words echoed off marble, drawing stares from guests who hadn't noticed the drama before. Now, the crowd thickened, forming a quiet ring of witnesses. And still she stayed calm. Her eyes blinked slowly, as if weighing every syllable unsaid. Inside, memory flickered. A hotel lobby at 16, being told, "This area isn't for people like you." The sting then was raw, but it taught her something. Not every insult deserves her voice. Some deserve her silence because silence makes the cruelty echo louder. The matriarch scoffed, mistaking stillness for weakness. She can't even defend herself. Typical. Laughter followed again, but weaker this time, thinner, as if the room itself doubted the script. She drew a breath. Calm, steady. Then, almost inaudible, she lifted her phone once more and whispered, "Hold position." Her assistant's voice answered faintly through the receiver, crisp and controlled. "Standing by." Ugh. She lowered the phone. Her expression didn't shift. She didn't fight their words. She let them hang in the air, poisoning only those who spoke them. The orchestra faltered again, strings quivering against the rising tension. Guests whispered behind half-raised glasses. A murmur spread. Why hadn't she left? Why hadn't she snapped back? Why did she stand so firmly like she belonged more than anyone else here? Because she did. And though the family couldn't see it yet, the silence they mocked was already the rope tightening around their empire. The ring of onlookers thickened. What began as a cruel family jest had become a spectacle, pulling eyes from every corner of the ballroom. Laughter still rippled, but unease threaded through it now, thin cracks in an otherwise polished facade. Near the orchestra, the young attorney shifted her weight, shoes scraping softly against marble. She had watched too many moments like this, smiles masking venom, prejudice wrapped in jokes. Her throat tightened as she looked at the woman in rows, still calm, still silent, still standing. She pulled out her phone, not brazenly, not yet, just enough to record audio, the red light blinking faint in her palm. A whisper escaped her. "This isn't right." Across the room, the junior associate kept his own camera steady. His hands trembled, not from fear of being caught, but from the weight of what he was documenting. He had entered this world chasing ambition, dreaming of power, but tonight he realized power didn't sit in champagne towers or marble balconies. It stood in the silence of a black woman holding her ground. A pair of older guests frowned, exchanging uneasy glances. The patriarch's booming voice hadn't inspired them, it had unsettled them. They sipped their drinks slower, eyes darting back to the circle forming around her. The matriarch, drunk on her own cruelty, mistook the shifting current as further entertainment. She raised her voice again. "Come on, dear. If you're lost, I'll happily call security for you." Gasps followed, sharper now. Some guests looked down into their glasses, ashamed of their silence. Others leaned closer, phones slipping into their hands like instinct. The woman in rows didn't move. Not a muscle, not a word. Her calm radiated stronger than their mockery, like a stone in a raging river. The young attorney couldn't hold it in any longer. Her voice cracked, but it carried. "She's done nothing wrong. You can't treat someone like this." Heads turned, surprise etched on faces. No one expected the first break in silence to come from her, a junior, not yet seasoned in these ruthless circles. The matriarch snapped her head around, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" Her tone sliced, daring defiance. The attorney's hands shook, but she steadied her voice. "You're humiliating her for no reason. This isn't power. It's prejudice." The room stilled. The orchestra faltered completely this time, bows hanging above strings. For the first time all evening, the laughter didn't follow. The patriarch sneered, waving her off. "Another nobody playing savior. Sit down before you embarrass yourself." But the attorney didn't. And neither did the young associate whose recording light glowed brighter, bolder now. A whisper spread through the crowd. "She's being harassed. Someone should stop this." The family had wanted an audience. Now they had one. Only, it wasn't clapping anymore. The woman in rows remained composed, letting others find their voice first, because she knew once witnesses begin to stir, injustice no longer belongs to silence. It belongs to history. The matriarch's smile thinned into something colder. The fact that a young attorney dared to speak against her only sharpened her cruelty. She turned back toward the woman in rows, voice ringing across the marble floor. "Enough of this charade. You don't belong here. Not in this room, not in this deal. People like you don't get to decide the fate of $900 million. The words dropped like stones, and this time, even some who had laughed before fell silent. The arrogance had shed its disguise. It was no longer subtle mockery, it was exclusion carved in stone. The patriarch slammed his glass onto the bar with a heavy thud, amber liquid splashing over his cufflinks. He pointed, his voice booming. "Security should have handled this already. She's wasting oxygen in a room where every breath is worth more than she'll see in a lifetime." The son laughed openly now, emboldened by his parents. "Imagine thinking you're one of us. Look at her dress, rose-colored, plain as a department store rack. And she dares to stand here while empires are negotiated? Pathetic." Laughter erupted again, crueler, sharper. But it didn't fill the room the way it had before. Instead, it clashed against the murmurs of discomfort growing louder in the corners. The woman in rows didn't respond. She simply shifted her weight, eyes calm, gaze unwavering. Her silence made their voices sound shriller, their insults smaller. The attorney, heart-pounding, spoke again. "She's not wasting oxygen. You are every word dripping hate." Her voice cracked, but the truth in it carried. The matriarch snapped back. "You'll regret that. Do you know who we are?" The attorney hesitated, but before fear could reclaim her, another voice rose from the back, a middle-aged guest, steady and unshaken. "We all know who you are. That's the problem." A ripple ran through the crowd. Phones lifted higher, angles widened. This wasn't just a scene anymore, it was evident. The patriarch's face flushed crimson. He straightened, tugging his jacket as if authority alone could hold the room. "This is our night, our deal, and if anyone thinks otherwise, they'll regret it." His hands sliced the air toward the woman in rows. "You leave, before we make you." Gasps spread. The threat was no longer veiled. It was direct, hostile, absolute. But she didn't move, not an inch. Her eyes swept the room once more, resting briefly on the attorney, then the young associate with the glowing phone. Then, slowly, she exhaled, calm, steady, anchored. And though her lips didn't part, the room felt it the tide was turning. Their cruelty was loud, but her silence was louder. The patriarch snapped his fingers. A waiter froze mid-step, uncertain, then retreated as the patriarch seized a thick leather folder from the bar. He slapped it onto a nearby table, the sound cracking through the air like a judge's gavel. Inside, the draft of the $900 million contract they had boasted about all evening. He shoved it forward, pages sliding across the polished wood until they stopped inches from her hand. "Sign here," he barked, voice vibrating with command. "Then leave, quickly, before you embarrass yourself any further." The matriarch leaned in, her perfume cloying, her smile venomous. "Consider it a gift. We're giving you a chance to touch something you'll never own. Put your name on the paper and disappear, darling. This is as close to power as you'll ever get." A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. The insult wasn't coded anymore. It was naked, brutal. The son added his mockery, leaning lazily against a chair. "If she won't sign, I'll call security myself, or maybe just escort her out. Can't have the staff pretending to sit with billionaires, can we?" His words dripped like acid, designed to humiliate, to reduce. The young attorney gasped. "This is outrageous." But the matriarch cut her off with a glare. "Silence. You don't speak here. Not when grown men are negotiating real money." Laughter followed, hollow and strained. Some guests chuckled out of habit, others out of fear, but many no longer smiled. Phones stayed raised, eyes wide. The spectacle was turning into scandal. And still, the woman in rows didn't flinch. She let the folder sit where it landed, untouched. She didn't reach for the pen. She didn't glance at the contract. She let their arrogance fill the silence like smoke filling a chamber, choking only those who breathed it in. The patriarch slammed the pen onto the folder, ink staining the corner of the page. "Sign, now, or get dragged out. Either way, this ends tonight." A murmur swept the room. Security was coming. 2 guards lingered by the doors, uncertain, waiting for a signal. The son smirked, certain victory was near. But the woman in rows stood perfectly still. Then, slowly, she lifted her phone again. Her lips barely parted, but her words carried with precision. Execute protocol. The assistant's voice on the other end was crisp. Confirmed. She lowered the phone, her eyes calm, her expression unreadable. The contract lay open before her like bait, but she didn't move. The matriarch scoffed, mistaking composure for surrender. Pathetic. She can't even pick up a pen. That's all you need to know about her place in this world. But the room wasn't convinced anymore. Whispers grew louder. Phones recorded every syllable. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some stepping back, others leaning in closer. The tide was swelling, and only she knew the wave about to break. The silence that followed her words was heavier than the chandelier above them. Execute protocol. The matriarch blinked, confused. The patriarch laughed, but it cracked around the edges. Protocol? What protocol? The only thing happening here is you leaving this room. He shoved the contract closer, the pen rolling across the table. Last chance. She didn't touch it. Instead, she lifted her phone higher, her voice calm, unwavering. Terminate the transaction. Effective immediately. The room stiffened. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Even the orchestra stopped playing, bows hovering above strings like suspended breath. From the phone, her assistant's voice came crisp and unflinching. Confirmed. The $900 million acquisition has been canceled. Notification sent to all parties. Gasps erupted. A ripple moved through the crowd like a shockwave, glasses lowering, eyes widening. Guests exchanged stunned looks, unsure if they had heard correctly. Canceled. The word rang louder than the patriarch's threats, louder than the matriarch's scorn. The son barked a laugh, forced and hollow. You expect us to believe you had anything to do with this deal? You, dressed like that? Please. But his phone buzzed, then his father's, then his mother's. Notifications pinged across the table. A chain reaction spread executives, advisors, investors in the room, all pulling out their devices, scanning the screens with growing horror. Subject line, deal termination notice, effective immediately. The patriarch's face drained of color. His lips parted, but no words emerged. The matriarch's smirk shattered into disbelief. She fumbled with her phone, scrolling furiously, as if sheer will could undo what had already been done. The crowd murmured, voices rising in a storm. Is this real? Who sent it? Wait, she did this? Phones lifted higher now, not just to record her humiliation, but to capture her revelation. She lowered her own phone, finally breaking her silence with words meant for the entire room. Her voice didn't rise above the chaos. It didn't need to. It cut through clean, steady. The deal you bragged about all night is over, and it ended the moment you mistook dignity for weakness. The attorney exhaled, relief flooding her chest. The junior associate whispered almost in awe. She wasn't bluffing. His phone never wavered. Security at the door hesitated, glancing at one another. They were no longer sure who they were meant to escort out. The power had shifted. The balance was breaking. The patriarch slammed his fist on the table, desperate. This is fraud. She has no authority. But even as he spoke, another notification flashed on his phone. This one colder, legal, irrefutable. Contract nullification executed by primary stakeholder. The matriarch's hand trembled. Primary. Stakeholder? She turned slowly, eyes narrowing on the woman in rows. And for the first time, the laughter was gone. The matriarch's voice cracked, brittle under the weight of the words on her phone. Primary stakeholder. She looked up, her confidence evaporating. The patriarch leaned forward, his face pale, searching for answers that weren't there. The woman in rows finally stepped closer to the table. No rush, no hesitation. Each step echoed on marble, steady as a drumbeat. She stopped in front of the contract, the pen still lying where he had slammed it. For the first time all night, she touched the folder only to close it gently, sliding it back toward them. Her eyes swept the family, then the crowd. When she spoke, her voice was low but carried to every corner of the ballroom. You mocked me in a room I own. You called me an outsider in a deal that depended on me. And tonight, you learned the difference between perception and reality. Gasps spread like wildfire. Phones tilted higher. The attorney covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with vindication. The young associate whispered, She's the one. She's the CEO. The patriarch shook his head violently, denial spilling from his lips. Impossible! We've been negotiating with... Her gaze cut him down. With me. Through every channel, every clause, every stipulation you bragged about twisting in your favor. It was my company across the table. Mine to grant. Mine to end. The matriarch staggered back half a step. Her voice faltered. You own the firm? No, she corrected. Calm but lethal. I built it. The words detonated in the air. Guests whispered, stunned. Some clapped a hand over their chest. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The orchestra lowered their instruments entirely, frozen in the silence that followed. She straightened, shoulders squared, her presence commanding the entire room without ever raising her tone. For years, I've listened to voices like yours, telling me where I don't belong, ordering me to the sidelines. Tonight, you wanted me small again. But the truth is, the contract, the capital, the control, it was never yours. It was always mine. Her assistant's voice chimed through the phone once more, projected just enough for the nearest guests to hear, all systems confirm, transfer canceled, stakeholder authority verified. The patriarch's glass slipped from his hand, shattering on marble. He didn't flinch at the shards cutting near his shoes. He only stared, realization sinking like a weight tied to his chest. Around them, the tide turned. Guests who had laughed now looked away in shame. Others leaned forward, hungry for every word. The young attorney whispered, almost reverent, "She didn't just cancel the deal. She dismantled their pride." The woman in rose let the silence breathe, then delivered the line that sealed the night. "You thought wealth gave you power, but wealth without respect is nothing, and tonight you lost both." The room erupted not in laughter, but in applause. Real, unrestrained. Some guests rose to their feet, clapping hard enough to echo against the chandeliers. Phones streamed live, the reveal spreading beyond the ballroom in real time. And at the center, she stood, unshaken. The applause swelled, rolling through the ballroom like thunder. For a moment, the marble columns themselves seemed to vibrate with the sound. Phones tilted higher, faces lit by screens capturing history in real time. The patriarch stood frozen, his knuckles white against the edge of the table. The contract he had once flaunted lay closed, its pages meaningless now. Sweat glistened at his temples, running down to a collar that suddenly felt too tight. His empire, his reputation, his leverage slipping all at once. The matriarch reached for her pearls, fingers trembling. This is a stunt," she stammered, her voice stripped of certainty. "It has to be. No woman, no black woman could have." Her words faltered as the attorney's phone screen glowed red, recording every syllable. The crowd hissed, disgust rolling over them like a wave. The son tried to salvage pride, puffing out his chest. "None of this changes who we are. We're still the family everyone in this room answers to." But no one answered. Not this time. The silence that followed wasn't obedience, it was rejection. The young associate stepped forward from the edge of the circle, voice unsteady but loud enough. "You don't own the room anymore. She does. She always did." Gasps rippled again, not at his words but at the courage behind them. Guests began murmuring, voices aligning against the family that had ruled unchecked for too long. The patriarch's fury cracked through his denial. "Do you people hear yourselves? She's humiliating us in our own city," his shout echoed. But it sounded hollow now, drowned beneath the steady applause building again for the woman in rose. Security hovered near the doors, caught between orders they once followed blindly and the truth unraveling before them. Their radios crackled, but no one moved. Even they understood the power had shifted hands. The matriarch's voice pitched higher, brittle with desperation. "You'll regret this." She spat at the woman in rose. "No one cancels on us, no one." But her threat sounded less like command and more like a plea. Her authority crumbled, exposed as fragile. The attorney finally stepped fully into the circle, standing beside the woman in rose. Her voice rang clear. "No one humiliates her either. Not anymore." Applause roared again. A chant almost formed, voices layered with conviction. Some guests set down their glasses to clap harder. Others raised phones above their heads like banners of solidarity. The tide was undeniable. The woman in rose didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply stood taller, letting the room shift around her. The very people who once looked through her now leaned toward her, drawn by dignity that outshone all their wealth combined. The patriarch slumped into a chair, face ashen. The matriarch clasped her pearls until her knuckles blanched. Their son looked away, jaw tight, pride crumbling. And all around them, witnesses chose a side, and it wasn't theirs. The ballroom pulsed with energy, half awe, half disbelief. Every eye locked on her, waiting. Every phone lens aimed steady, hungry to capture the next words. The woman in rose let the noise wash over her, then raised a hand. The applause softened, conversations hushed, as if the chandeliers themselves leaned closer to listen. Her gaze cut across the room, landing squarely on the family that had mocked her minutes before. "You wanted me small," she said, her tone calm but carrying. "You wanted me silent, obedient, grateful for scraps. Instead, you just lost everything you thought you owned." The patriarch lurched forward, desperate. "We can renegotiate. Forget the insults. We'll double the terms." She shook her head slowly, silencing him without effort. "This isn't about terms. This is about respect. And you proved tonight you don't deserve any." Gasps fluttered through the crowd. The matriarch clutched at her pearls, voice shrill. "You can't do this. Do you have any idea what doors will close for you if you humiliate us?" Her response was a quiet dagger. "The only doors closing tonight are yours." She lifted her phone one final time. Effective immediately, cut ties, every channel, every contract pending with their holdings terminate. Her assistant's voice came through, crisp and final. "Confirmed. All partnerships void. Legal notices dispatched." The matriarch staggered, her knees buckling slightly. The son cursed under his breath, his bravado evaporating. The patriarch sank into his chair, the weight of collapse pressing his shoulders down. Around them, guests erupted not in pity, but in relief, in vindication. Some clapped again, others cheered outright. Phones streamed the moment live, comments flooding faster than the family could breathe. Justice served. "This is history." The attorney at her side whispered, "You just destroyed them." The woman in rose didn't smile. Her face remained steady, unreadable. "I didn't destroy them. They did. I only refused to carry the weight of their arrogance any longer." Her words rippled through the crowd, striking deeper than any applause. It wasn't revenge. It was correction. It was justice. The patriarch's voice broke, small now. "Please, think of our legacy." She met his eyes, unwavering. Legacies built on disrespect deserve to end. The sentence was passed, irrevocable, and in that instant, the family who once ruled the room no longer owned even their own dignity. The ballroom was no longer theirs. Applause thundered, phones streamed, whispers of admiration rolled like waves. The once feared family sat shattered pearls, trembling, fists clenched, eyes hollow, and at the center of it all stood the woman in rose, steady as stone. She didn't bask in the victory. She didn't need to. Her silence, her poise, her unshaken dignity, that was the victory. She took one final look around the room. Faces that once smirked now softened with awe. Guests who had doubted her now leaned forward, desperate to remember every detail. Somewhere in the back, the young associate lowered his phone, whispering, almost reverent, "This changes everything." She turned back to the family who had mocked her. "You thought tonight was about money, about leverage, about proving your name still mattered." She paused, her voice tightening with conviction. "But tonight was about something greater dignity, and that can't be bought, bullied, or borrowed." The matriarch tried to speak, but her voice broke before a single word could form. The patriarch bowed his head, shoulders sagging. Their son looked away, unable to face the truth. The woman in rose stepped forward, placing the untouched champagne flute gently onto the table. The crystal rang softly against the marble, a sound clearer and sharper than their broken pride. Then she said the line that would echo beyond the walls of that ballroom, replayed in clips across every screen that captured it. "I don't need to record justice. I am the result of it." The room erupted, cheers, applause, shouts of vindication. Some guests rose to their feet, clapping until their palms burned. The orchestra, uncertain but moved, struck a single triumphant chord that filled the air. Without another glance, she turned, her heels clicking softly against marble. Each step was unhurried, deliberate. The crowd parted instinctively, a path opening like water bowing to stone. The attorney followed her with tear-bright eyes, inspired. The associate whispered, "That's power," his voice trembling as he saved the recording to his phone. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Behind her, a family's empire had crumbled. Ahead of her, the future stood open not for them, but for her. And as the doors closed behind her, the ballroom erupted again, not for wealth, not for titles, but for the truth she had left burning in their bones. Respect isn't granted by money. It's commanded by dignity.